She looked at me like she'd already lived this moment, like somewhere in a story I hadn't read yet, we'd already fallen in love. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that should have passed without leaving a trace. I was at the cafe I always go to after work, the one tucked behind the old bookstore on Maple Street. The place has this faint smell of roasted coffee and paper, a mix that somehow slows the world down. I was halfway through pretending to read when she walked in. Not the kind of entrance that turns heads, no drama, no noise. Just a quiet sort of grace, like she belonged to the air itself. She was a little older, maybe in her early 40s, though age didn't seem to cling to her the way it does to most people. She carried herself with that calm certainty that comes from knowing who you are, a kind of elegance you can't fake. She ordered her drinks softly, her voice steady, the kind that makes you want to lean closer just to catch every word. When she turned to find a seat, her eyes brushed over mine, and for a moment, everything else blurred out. It wasn't a long look, not really, but there was something in it, something that made me feel like she already knew me. Not in a dramatic, soulmate kind of way, more like recognition. As if she was reading a line in a story she'd already written, and I just happened to walk into the page. She sat by the window, sunlight folding around her like a quiet companion. I kept pretending to read, though I couldn't remember a single word on the page. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, how she smiled politely at the barista who brought her drink, how she paused before writing something in her notebook. There was a rhythm to her movements, unhurried, deliberate, and somehow that stillness drew me in more than anything loud or flashy ever could. At one point, she glanced up again. Our eyes met, and this time, neither of us looked away. Her gaze wasn't intense, it was calm, curious. But it held me there, like she could see right past everything I pretend to be, all the small talk, the composure, the practiced ease. For a few seconds, I forgot how to breathe. Then she smiled, just barely, a small curve at the edge of her lips that felt like both a question and an answer. I smiled back, probably awkwardly. She lowered her gaze again, went back to writing, but something had already shifted. I couldn't explain it, not even to myself, but I knew I wouldn't forget that look. The way it held time still. The way it made me feel as if my life had just quietly changed direction, and I was the only one who noticed. And in that soft hum of afternoon light and coffee steam, I realized sometimes a story doesn't begin with words. Sometimes it starts with a look that stays too long. After that first afternoon, I told myself it was just a passing glance, one of those quiet collisions that happen and fade before you can name them. But a few days later, I saw her again. Same cafe, same window seat, as if the place belonged to her rhythm more than the rest of us. This time, I didn't hesitate. I ordered my coffee and found a spot a few tables away, pretending again to read. She was writing, her pen gliding across the page with a steadiness that made me curious about what kind of story she kept there. When the barista came by, he mixed up our orders. Her cup ended up on my table, mine on hers. It was a small, silly mistake, but it gave me a reason to approach her, something I might have spent a lifetime overthinking if fate hadn't given me a nudge. She looked up as I held out the cup. "Think this might be yours," I said, smiling a little too quickly. Her eyes softened with amusement. "That explains why mine suddenly smelled stronger than I like it," she replied. Her voice had that calm confidence again, the kind that makes simple words sound like something you want to keep hearing. We exchanged a few polite sentences, names, small talk, a light joke about how caffeine and chaos seem to pair well. But even in that short exchange, something deeper stirred beneath the surface. She didn't rush her sentences. She let silence fill the spaces between them. And it was in those spaces that I started to notice everything. The way her eyes flickered when she laughed, the soft rhythm of her breath as she thought before speaking, the faint floral scent that lingered in the air when she leaned forward slightly. When she asked what I was reading, I admitted I hadn't really been reading at all. She smiled knowingly. "Some books are just excuses to sit still," she said. We talked for a while about stories, music, the strange comfort of being alone in public. There was no flirting, not really, just quiet curiosity, the kind that feels heavier than words. Every time she laughed, something inside me loosened, a knot I hadn't realized was there. And when she fell silent, I didn't feel the need to fill it. I liked the way silence sat between us, soft and alive. At one point, our hands brushed as we reached for the sugar jar. A small accidental thing. But her fingertips were warm, and for a second neither of us moved. Just that light touch. Simple, human, but somehow electric. She didn't pull away immediately. She just looked at me, a glance that carried both awareness and restraint, and then she smiled, gently reclaiming her hand. We went back to talking, but the tone had changed. There was something new in the air, a subtle pulse that neither of us named, but both of us felt. And as the afternoon light slipped toward evening, I realized that not all conversations happen through words. Some unfold in glances, pauses, and the quiet realization that someone sees you a little more clearly than you expected. For a while, seeing her became part of my days, not planned, but expected in the quiet way you expect sunlight through a familiar window. We'd talk, sometimes for hours, sometimes just for minutes. It always felt easy, natural, but comfort has a way of making you forget how fragile it can be. I started to notice the changes slowly, little things that didn't seem like much at first. One afternoon, she arrived later than usual. Her greeting was warm, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She kept her coat on, as if she wasn't planning to stay long. When I asked how she'd been, she said, busy, and left it there. No details, no playful follow-up question. Just a small wall where there hadn't been one before. It wasn't that she was unkind. She was still gentle, still thoughtful. But something about her felt guarded. Her laughter didn't come as easily, and when it did, it ended too soon. I caught her glancing around the cafe more often, as if suddenly aware that people could be watching. Maybe it was the difference between us, not just in years, but in how we saw the world. I was still learning what I wanted. She already knew what she could lose. That realization hit me one evening when we left at the same time. We walked in step for a few blocks before the conversation faltered. There was a pause, not uncomfortable but heavy, the kind of silence that asks a question you're both too afraid to answer. Finally, she spoke. "You're kind," she said softly. "It's rare to meet someone who really listens." The way she said it felt final, like gratitude before goodbye. I tried to smile. "You make it easy to listen," I said. She looked at me, then really looked, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. There was warmth there, and something like longing, but also caution. "Be careful with that," she murmured, almost to herself. "Listening can make you see too much." After that night, things shifted. She didn't avoid me completely, but she became careful, measured. Our talk stayed polite, almost formal. If our hands brushed again, she pulled away quickly. The distance wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, like she was already protecting herself from something that hadn't even happened yet. I told myself to let it be, to stop overthinking, to just appreciate whatever this was. But every time she smiled that half-smile, I could feel what wasn't being said pressing between us. The cafe felt different without her ease in it. I'd sit by the window, pretending not to look for her, and wonder if she felt it too, that strange ache of something beautiful beginning to retreat before it even had a chance to bloom. And though she never said the words, I could feel her slipping behind the kind of walls people build when they're afraid of being seen too clearly. That was when I realized sometimes distance isn't measured in steps, but in the quiet space between two people who still care and can no longer say how much. It happened on a Thursday evening, one of those long, restless nights when the sky can't decide between dusk and dark. I wasn't planning to see her. I'd gone out for a walk, hoping the air would clear my head, when I found myself wandering toward the old library where the cafe held an after-hours poetry reading. She was there. She stood near the back, arms folded loosely, her face half-lit by the amber glow of the reading lamps. I almost turned away. I convinced myself she wanted distance, but before I could, she noticed me. Her eyes softened, the way they always did, and she gave me a small, quiet smile. Not an invitation, but not dismissal either. Something in between. I walked over, uncertain but drawn. "I didn't know you liked poetry readings," I said, keeping my voice low. "I don't," Usually, she replied, glancing toward the stage. But sometimes it's nice to listen to words that don't ask anything from you. There was something fragile in the way she said it, like she wasn't talking about poetry at all. When the reading ended, the small crowd filtered out, leaving behind that peculiar calm that lingers after shared silence. She hesitated by the door, then asked, "Would you walk with me for a bit?" The night air was cool, the kind that made every breath visible. We walked slowly, our footsteps echoing against the cobblestones. Neither of us spoke for a while. The world felt pared down, just the rhythm of walking, the faint hum of the city, and the sound of her scarf brushing against her coat. After a few blocks, she broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like life happens faster than you can make sense of it?" she asked. I nodded. "All the time." She smiled faintly, eyes on the ground. "When I was younger, I thought growing older would make things clearer. But sometimes I think it just makes you more aware of how fragile everything is." Her voice trembled slightly, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability behind her composure, the quiet weight she carried. I didn't say much. I just listened. When she stopped walking, I turned toward her. Her eyes glistened faintly in the streetlight. Not tears, just that soft shine people get when they're holding too much inside. "You're easy to talk to," she said, her breath forming a small cloud between us. "Maybe because I don't try to fix anything," I replied. She gave a small laugh, one that broke halfway through, tender and tired. Then she shivered. Without thinking, I slipped off my jacket and offered it to her. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she took it, her fingers brushing mine, a small, deliberate touch that said more than words could. She draped it over her shoulders and looked up at me. "Thank you," she whispered. We kept walking, closer now. Our hands didn't touch again, but the space between us felt different. Not empty anymore, but quietly alive. And as the streetlights stretched our shadows long across the pavement, I realized this wasn't just a chance encounter. It was the evening we hadn't meant to share, the one that would make it impossible to go back to pretending we were just two strangers who happened to meet. I didn't see her for nearly a week after that night. The cafe felt hollow without her in it, like a favorite song with one note missing. I still went, hoping I'd catch a glimpse of her at the window, the way I always had. Every time the door opened, I looked up, and every time, it wasn't her. Then one rainy afternoon, when I'd nearly given up waiting, she appeared. Her hair was damp from the drizzle, her coat unbuttoned just enough for the cold to slip through. She smiled when she saw me, small, hesitant but real. "Thought you disappeared," I said, half joking, half honest. "I almost did," she replied softly, shaking the rain from her hands. "But disappearing doesn't fix much, does it?" She sat across from me, the same seat she'd always chosen. For a moment, we didn't talk. The only sounds were the rain tapping against the glass and the low murmur of other conversations around us. It was peaceful, but fragile, like sitting inside a moment that could break if we moved too quickly. When the barista brought our drinks, her fingers brushed mine as she took her cup. It was a small touch, but the warmth of it seemed to travel straight through my chest. She didn't pull back immediately. Instead, she let the moment linger, eyes meeting mine in a silence that said everything words couldn't. I could see it in her expression, the same mixture of affection and restraint that had been growing between us since the beginning. It wasn't uncertainty. It was knowing exactly what this was and being afraid of it anyway. We started talking again, but the tone had changed. Our conversation wandered, from books to travel to how strange it feels to meet someone who listens too closely. She said it with a teasing smile, but there was something vulnerable underneath it. I wanted to tell her that I didn't mean to listen like that. It just happened. That every time she spoke, I found myself memorizing the shape of her words, the rise and fall of her voice. Instead, I just nodded and smiled. At one point, she reached out, not to touch, but to adjust the sleeve of my shirt, which had come undone at the wrist. It was the smallest gesture, but her fingers moved slowly, carefully, as if the act itself meant something more. My breath caught. I don't think she missed it. When she finished, she looked up and said quietly, "You make it too easy to forget where the lines are." Her words lingered in the air between us, soft but unmistakable. I didn't answer. I couldn't. She smiled again, this time with a trace of sadness. "Don't look at me like that," she said, half laughing, half whispering. "Like what?" "Like you already know what I'm thinking." And maybe I did. Maybe we both did. But neither of us said it out loud. We just sat there, the rain still falling outside, our hands inches apart, knowing that whatever this was, it had already crossed from curiosity into something neither of us could name without changing everything. The next time I saw her, something felt different. The usual quiet ease between us was gone, replaced by a faint stiffness I couldn't name. She sat by the window again, but her posture was guarded, her notebook closed, her coffee untouched. When she looked up, her smile was polite. Too polite. "Hey," I said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. "Hi," she answered. Just that. A single syllable, small but heavy. I tried to ease the tension. Asked about her week, her writing, even the weather. Anything to pull her back into the space we used to share. But her answers came in short, careful sentences, her eyes drifting toward the window every few moments. Finally, I stopped pretending. Did I do something? Her fingers tightened around her cup. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "No, you didn't do anything." The words were right, but her tone wasn't. It carried that brittle kindness people use when they're trying not to hurt you. She took a quiet breath. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "that maybe I shouldn't come here for a while." The words landed like a small, soft blow. My heart didn't race. It just sank, low and heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. "Why?" I asked. Her gaze finally met mine, and I saw it. The mix of fear and sadness she'd been hiding. "Because this," she gestured between us, "is starting to feel like something it shouldn't." I didn't answer right away. I didn't trust myself to. The air between us felt too thin, too fragile. She went on, her voice trembling just enough to betray her composure. "People will talk. They always do. And even if they don't, I can't pretend it doesn't matter." She hesitated, then added, almost whispering, "You make it too easy to forget where I am in my life." There was no accusation in her words, only honesty. And beneath it, something like sorrow. I wanted to tell her that I didn't care what people thought, that I just wanted to keep knowing her, keep listening. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was asking for understanding. So I nodded. "If that's what you need," I said quietly. She exhaled, relieved and regretful all at once. "It's not what I want," she admitted, "but it's what makes sense." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the world went on. The hum of traffic, the clink of dishes, the faint whistle of wind against the glass. Finally, she stood, gathering her things. But just before leaving, she hesitated, her hand resting on the back of her chair. "You're a good man," she said softly. "That's part of the problem." And then she turned to go. Without thinking, I reached out, not to stop her, just to touch her sleeve. She froze, looking back at me. "I don't know what this is," I said, "but I know it matters." Her expression broke, just slightly, enough for me to see the truth behind it. She nodded once, eyes shining. "I know," she whispered, and then she walked away. The sound of the door closing behind her felt louder than it should have. The cafe seemed suddenly too big, too quiet. But in that silence, something became clear. This wasn't an ending. It was the moment before everything finally had to be said. Weeks passed before I saw her again. The cafe had gone back to its ordinary rhythm. Spoons against porcelain, low conversation, the same worn jazz record looping through the speakers. Yet everything felt slightly hollow, as if the place was missing its center of gravity. I kept coming, not because I expected her to walk in, but because I didn't know how to stop waiting. Some part of me believed that if I just stayed still long enough, the story we'd almost told would find its way back to me. Then, one late morning, she did. No warning, no dramatic entrance, just the sound of the doorbell and the quiet certainty that something had returned. She looked different somehow, lighter, calmer. Maybe I did too. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. I smiled. "Always." We didn't rush into conversation. She placed her notebook on the table, the same one that had been closed that last day, and traced her finger along its edge. I wasn't sure I'd come back, she said finally. But I missed the way you listen. There was no accusation in her tone, no apology either. Just honesty, the kind we'd both learned to live inside. I miss the way you talk, I replied. Her laugh was soft, genuine. I talk too much. Not to me. We sat there for a while, letting the quiet fill in the spaces words couldn't. Outside, sunlight stretched across the pavement, turning the window into a frame of golden light. The tension that had once lived between us wasn't gone. Exactly. It had just settled into something gentler, something that no longer asked for definition. At one point, she opened her notebook. Inside were pages filled with tidy handwriting, bits of poetry, lines of dialogue, fragments of thought. She turned one of the pages toward me. It was a short paragraph. Nothing dramatic, just a few lines about two people meeting by accident and changing each other in small, permanent ways. Is that us? I asked quietly. She smiled. Maybe. Maybe it's just what happens when people see each other clearly. Her hand rested on mine. Not possessive, not uncertain, simply there. The warmth of it was familiar, grounding. I turned my palm to meet hers, fingers resting lightly between hers. For a moment, we just stayed like that, the world outside moving at its usual pace while we sat suspended in a slower one. I used to think you'd already written our story, I said, that you knew how it ended. She looked at me, eyes steady. I didn't know the ending, she said softly. I just knew it would be something worth remembering. We stayed until the light shifted and the cafe began to empty. When she finally stood, she didn't say goodbye. She just pressed her hand briefly to my shoulder, an anchor, a thank you, and a promise all at once. After she left, I sat alone, the echo of her touch still warm against my skin. I realized that maybe she had written our story, but not as a love affair or a confession. She'd written it as a moment in time, complete in itself, something that didn't need forever to be real. And somehow that felt enough.